Hello everyone. So in last week we have finished our motion planning part 1, which is also stick to or which was related to articulated arm. And in this week we are going to start our next module, which is module number 5. That is the last module of our introduction to robotics course, and it is related to mobile robots motion planning. And so today we are going to talk about more about motion planning in the context of mobile robots. And before we get to that, let's quickly recap what we talked about last week for motion planning as a general problem. And we face this as this question: finding a path from a current position of a robot to the end position of the robot. Similarly for mobile robot. For mobile robot, it's obviously a pretty straightforward case of here is robot right now. So that is what I'd like robot to be. I have these obstacles along the way, and maybe the pieces of furniture, it can be something else also. So I need to get from point A to point B, find a path that doesn't hit anything along the way. And for robot arm, the question seems a little bit different. The robot arm, obviously the base is fixed here, and the arm is an articulated device. So the question is how to get the end effector from point A to point B. And but what I need to do, I decide how the joints need to move, okay, such that the end effector gets from point A to point B, and none of the link of the robot hits anything along the way. So that's the motion planning problem. Find a path from the start to the goal for the robot arms, and for mobile robots also it's the same. Now it turns out though that these two problems are remarkably similar once we think about the robot arm, not in Cartesian space or task space, but in configuration space. So this is our configuration space. So of a two-dimensional this is a configuration of space of a two-dimensional robot arm, but instead of having the Cartesian space x and y along the x-axis, instead I have the values q1 and q2 along but for a robot with more joints than the configuration space, it will be higher dimensional problem. And then what you do is you map the obstacle from Cartesian space into configuration space. So this map here in white shows that these are the acceptable positions of q1 and q2 in configuration space. So if the robot assumes that configuration here somewhere here, it will not hit anything, whereas things that are colored here is shown in this space and that are illegal because of the collision, here you have obstacle. So now again the problem becomes the robot starts with some joint values. So whatever joint values you have, you will move in some configuration space here. So now I need to find a path for a point from start to the configuration for a desired position. So if I am moving like this, and if I have obstacle and it is showing somewhere here in this, then I have to choose a path so that I can cross it very easily, and maybe I will move here and then I will come out here to reach here. So I will pass all the obstacles. Now here again is our mobile robot. Still shown Cartesian space x and y along the axis. So motion planning for both of these cases, let's find a path that get moving from point A to point B without hitting any obstacle along the way, right? So and last week we talked about the practical algorithm that work well for robot arm, where the configuration space we have, and so that's the space that I am doing motion planning, tends to be high dimensional, 6 dimensional, 7 dimensional, and means robot have 6 or 7 joints. But for a mobile robot, often the space that you are doing the search in Cartesian space is lower dimensional mostly. So most mobile robots will really only operate in a plane. So I only care about x and y. Of course, you know, drones flying robots will operate in 3D space, but x and y is very common. If I care about the orientation of the robot, then I can add in theta as a orientation as a part, but again very often it's just a two-dimensional space. So now here is a map where you start on the map, and the map is two-dimensional space, right? So now the question is, so if that indeed the case of the mobile robot is operating in fairly low dimensional space, then you have multiple way of representing your map. Similarly, in the last lectures that I have explained, here also ARM versus mobile robots. In mobile robots also you will save your obstacles in the same way, or same your map in the same way as the last one. So well, it's just a map where the area that the robot is in, and maybe you have a floor plan of where the robot is, and maybe you just go ahead and you measure where all pieces of furniture and all the walls and everything are, right? So like this you will have the details of everything, every coordinates of your room, and even the location of the furnitures and obstacles which is placed in the room, and you create exactly 2D map of the space. Maybe the mobile robot, the map itself, as maybe the mobile robot builds the map itself as it navigates using its own sensor. That's also a possibility, but that is not what we are going to cover in this class, right? So that is more advanced topic, and we are not going to cover that thing today. And in any case, you do have this floor plan which could come in one of multiple ways. So either you can have floor plan, or you just made a floor plan according to the situation. So it depends on. So maybe you have a polygonal representation where for each obstacles, maybe each pieces of furniture you have a polygon, okay, and you know the coordinates of each vertices of the polygon, okay. And so maybe for a specific furniture, whatever you have, you will have 5 vertices over here, let's say. Similarly for other furniture also you can have. So you have the coordinates for all those 5 vertices that defines this polygon. And here's another obstacle. This is one way to represent map, okay. So this is polygonal way of representing a map, and how we write the obstacles and all that thing that I have already explained in the last lecture. Okay, so another way to represent a map is to discretize them and have essentially what is called a grid. Similarly the last way, and you really only care where it is free. So the robot can travel through, and if it is occupied, then it will not go there. So it is a really binary problem, 0 or 1. And here we have one example. So this is the binary representation with 0 marking empty cells here, and here the binary representation I have also formatted as 8 by 8 matrix. So it is a 8 by 8 in a matrix form. So like that I wrote it over here. So that's a clear correspondence between these two. That's why I wrote it like this. But in practice and memory, this just get represented as a long stream of bits, where you have some additional information about the size of the rows and columns. So grids are nice. All you need to know is this cell free or not? If you are moving in any cell, is this cell free or not? So if it is free, you will move over there. So when you get additional information like a piece of an obstacle here, you will have that cell full. So you just go ahead and make each cell individually as occupied or not. So but grids though will take up quite a bit of space and memory. So if you think about it, for example, you have a room that's maybe 10 by 10 meters, so you will have 1000 by 1000 centimeters, and you want your grid to have 1 centimeter resolution. So you want each cell to be 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. You end up with a million cells in your grid. So that's tractable with the kind of memory that computer have today. It's not really that big a deal, but it does not tell you that if you had a 6-dimensional or 7-dimensional space, then you're dealing with which happens for robot arms. So that's discretization into grid. This is not computationally tractable, and for mobile robots especially, it is very good. those who you are just care about x and y position, representation of a map and are pretty common. And today we are going to look at motion planning algorithms, both if you have map represented in polygonal representation or if you have map in grid representation. So for both we are going to see. So let's do them one by one. And let's think about the polygonal map representation like this. And but the first thing we need to address is the subtlety where we have defined motion planning as the problem of finding a path from a point which is a start to another point which is a goal, right? So here you have a start and somewhere you have goal, and the path is made of lines in between, which is fine, but our robot isn't really a point. Our robot have some size, it's not a point, so there's some dimension to it. So here for example I have shown a mobile robot that has some specific size, right? And if I only reason about a tiny point, then what will happen? And the wall, so this is the wall, but the robot has some non-zero dimension, might not fit in. So any algorithm that only reasons about the point will have difficulty applying to robot that are not point. So if your robot is just you are considering as a point, and if it is near to it, it will hit the obstacle. So one way of doing to avoid it is to pre-process your map to do what's called map inflation. And instead of, in order to reduce a robot to a point, what you need to do is inflate your obstacles by the size of the robot. So like this. So you increase the size of the robot obstacles, size of the walls and everything by the size of the robot, and you will consider each obstacle the hull of the resulting into new polygon, right? So I have grown each obstacle by the size of the robot, and then these are my new obstacles. And now what's nice is that I can reduce the robot to a point like this, okay? And I know that on the inflated map, anywhere that a point will fit, the real robot will also fit on my original map. So now your map will be something like this. And so in inflated map it was like this, and inflated map will be like this, and your robot will consider as a point. So for an infinitesimally small point, I have a start, I have a goal somewhere, I need to find path that is infinitely thin, and so I know that the actual robot will fit in the original map where the obstacles have been inflated, which is great, because again we just think about this problem of motion planning as finding an infinitely thin path. So that's why we are considering our robot as a point. So how do we do that for polygonal map representation? So now we are going to see that in the next slide, and I hope you understand everything well here. So let's look at one possible map. Okay, so here is one possible map, and let's say that here the obstacles have already been inflated. We have considered that all the obstacles have already been inflated. There are no walls, and we don't have any walls around whole thing, but it don't really change anything. So I have three obstacles. I have a start point and I have a goal point. So I have one start point, I have a goal point. And a very common method is to convert your map representation to what's called a graph, and then take the advantage of a very well-known family of path planning algorithm for graphs. So what's a graph? So here a graph is a collection of nodes and edges where the edges connect to the nodes. So it's considered this all as a graph. You have collection of all the nodes and edges of all the points in the graph, and in this particular case for path planning for mobile robot, one way to convert a map into graph is to build what's called visibility graph. So here I have connected every vertices of every obstacle with every other vertices along as the straight line doesn't collide with anything. So each corner of your obstacles and even the start and goal point has been connected to whatever is visible to it. Okay. So every vertex I put line to every other vertices if the straight line doesn't collide with anything. And once I have done this, I can essentially forget about my obstacle and use just the graph instead. like this. Okay. So the former vertices of my obstacles have become the node of the graph, and then I have these edges that can connect various nodes, right? So that can connect various nodes, and so one thing that's nice is that I know that if I go from my start to the goal point uh, and only travel along the edges of my graph, I am guaranteed never to hit anything, because that's how I have built my graph originally, and it only contains the edges that doesn't collide with anything. And remember one thing, when I have started this example, I told you that all the obstacles are already inflated. So when you are moving from edges to edges, it means you are not touching the obstacle. So I know that if it's infinitely my point of the robot is very small and it travel along this line, then original robot, which has some dimension to it, is guaranteed not to collide with anything. So now I have reformulated my problem from finding a path from the start to the goal, just on the map in general, to find the path on this graph, searching for a path on this graph. So, and that's the problem that we have some very well known, very well studied algorithm for. So how do I find the path from start to the goal, going exclusively on the edges of the graph? Okay, so this is one way to find out this convert your maps into graphs. Now let's have one example, one example of some this kind of graph. So let's look at another example. So here what I have done, I have some nodes. Okay, so I have nodes, and each letter n shows a node of my graph. Okay, I have the edges, and then I have a start node S and last node, goal node, as G here. So the weight is or the cost of an edge. So here whatever is there, this is the weight and cost of this edge. So cost of an edge is associated with obviously what is the cost of the robot for moving along that edge. So what does this mean? That if your robot is moving, let's say, on this edge, it has some weightage of 11 or some cost of 11 that it has to cover for taking this path. If it is taking this path or this edge, it has to give this weightage or this cost to have this path. Okay, so a simple way to think of it is the cost as being equal to the length of the edge. Okay, so the edge is shorter, it's just the distance 11 units here, and the one is longer, which you can see over here is 37. So, and the problem becomes, I want to find a path from start to the goal such that the overall cost of the path is as low as possible. So if you start and end here, the overall cost of the path should be small. Okay, so if the cost that I have edges are length or distance, then the same as saying I want to find the shortest path from the start to goal, these costs could also be other things, not only distance or some length. It could be some other things. For example, it could maybe some of the edges are highway and some of the edges are really fast. Okay, so what I'm saying, we are talking in terms of time. So I can put the time cost on each edge. So in place of this distance, I am considering that this is the time that you are taking to have this path. Okay, so to keep thinking throughout this lecture, and we will just use distance and think about the cost of an edge as the length of the path, not as the time. So we will keep it constant throughout this lecture. So how do I found the shortest path from the start to the goal on this graph? Now that's the question. Okay, so in next slides I am going to give you just a minute. Okay, here's the next slide. So a very commonly algorithm for finding the shortest path on the graph is called Dijkstra algorithm, and the algorithm is right here basically. And the way it works is that at any time you keep the track of the shortest path from the start to the particular node, right? So as you go, you always keep track of the shortest path. So as you move here, you will always keep the track that you have covered 11 distance of 11. Okay, so as you go, you always keep track of these short paths until eventually you reach the goal. So let's see exactly how this works. So first of all, you say okay, all the nodes are unvisited, and so we just assume that the nodes so the nodes we don't have anything written on it, unvisited. So the only node that you know something about is the start, right? This one. And what you know the length of the shortest path from the start to itself. So distance of start to itself is 0. So the length of the shortest path from the start to itself is obviously 0. So I am going to put 0 here and say the path that I know is that if I go from start to itself, the shortest path to do that is 0. Okay, then what I am going to do is go in the main loop of the algorithm, which says take an unvisited node with lowest gn. Okay, so g of n marks the shortest path from the start. Okay, this g of n marks the shortest path from the start. So to that particular node that has the lowest g of n found so far. Okay, so well, I only have single g of n mark right now here, which is 0, and so the start itself is an unvisited node with the lowest g of n. So then I am going to mark it as visited like this. So I have marked it as a visited. So we have already visited this node. So now I am going to look at all of its neighbor, right? Like this is the neighbor, this is neighbor. So let's say one neighbor is node 1 and other neighbor is node 2. So I am going to say that the shortest path to start to node 1 is equal to the length of the path of the node. Okay, so if g of n is 0 right here, so g of n here will be 11. Okay, so I am going to mark an 11 for node 1, and similarly for node 2 here, the length of the edge is 10, and I am going to mark the n2, that g of n is going to be 10. So I have marked the start as visited. We are done, and we continue through the loop, and I am going to choose the unvisited node with lowest g of n. So I am going to choose unvisited node with lowest g of n. So after this you have two nodes. Which is the lowest one? This is the lowest one. So we will take this n2 and mark it as visited. Okay, so we have marked it as visited, and then I am going to look all the neighbors of n2. Okay, so we have n3 and n1 and n4. So well, since the shortest path to n3 till n2 is 10 and till n2 to n3 is 11, so at n3 you will have the total length as 21. So I am going to mark it here as 21. The same thing we will do with n4. We already have 10, so from n2 to n4 we have 32, so we will mark it as 42. So now n2 also has n1 as a neighbor here, right? So the shortest path to get n2 is 10. Okay, and from n2 to n1 is 18, so total will be 28, but we have already allocated 11 over here. So whichever is the smallest, we will keep that thing over here. So now, so that means I already have a path to get to n1 that's have length of 11. So that is the shortest length. So I don't have I will not have any path which have 28, so I'm just going to leave n1 and I am done with the neighbor of n2. So we loop again through the algorithm and let's choose the node that has the lowest g of n marked so far. So for n2, whatever nodes you have, 11, 21 and 42, which is the lowest? N1 is the lowest, so we will visit it. Okay, so now I am going to look at the neighbor of n1. What the neighbor of n1? So we have only n8. Okay, this is already visited, so we will not go over here. We already have n8 and we will mark it 22. So 11 plus 11 is 22. So let's keep going. So what's our next node with the lowest g of n? It's going to be n3. So from here you have n3. So this is remaining, this is remaining and this is remaining, which is already marked. So out of this is the smallest one, so we will visit it first and we will see what are the nodes that are extending from here. So this one and this one. So I already have 22 for n8. So 21 plus 18, it will be like something 39, and we will not write it over here because we already have the shortest path to reach over n8. So we will skip it. Okay, and so I am going to write it as and here then for n7, so it's 21 plus 15, it's 36, so I am going to write it here as 36. And what else is remaining is n4. So I have the path for n4, so 21 plus 22 is 43, but we already have a shortest path 42, so we will not write it 43 over here. Okay, so now which path are remaining? This one and this one. So this is unvisited. Okay, so this is because this is shortest, so we will mark it as unvisited. And now we will see what are the branches that are extending from n8. So it is this and this, going to n4, n7 and n6. Okay, so I have 22 at n8, so I am going to visit n8 and I am going to cross it out. So what neighbor does n8 have? n6 you have, and is going to be 22 plus 31 for n6, so that is 53. And then we have n7, which is a neighbor, and 22 plus 20, it's 42, but we have 36 already, so we will not write 42. And 4 is also a neighbor for it, and the length of the path could be 22 plus 37, that's 59, but we already have 42, so we will skip the 59 over here. Okay, now let's keep going. Let's keep what's the lowest number that I have ever now. So we have 36, 53 and 42, so we will mark and we will visit n7. So it's visited now. Okay, so now from n7, who is the neighbor? n6 and n4 are the only two neighbors. So 36 plus 11 will be what? 47. Okay, but we have 53 here. So now I had a 53 for n6 already, but 47 is the lowest than 53. So then I am going to get rid of 53 and I will replace it with newly found 47 for node number 6. Okay, I will replace it with 47, and I am going to make right here with 47. Now I have new g on f and g of n for node number 6. Now another neighbor is n4. So the path will be 36 plus 20, which is 56, but we have 42, so we will not write it here. So n4 is going to be the next, if you see which to visit, because this is the smallest, so n4 we will visit it. And now from n4 we will see what are the nodes. So only one node is coming out because this is already visited, and when we will add 42 plus 11, we will come out 53. We will mark it, and I am pretty much done. Who is the next? So I have 47 here and 53 here. So this is the smallest node, so we will visit it. Okay, so now 47 is so n6. I am going to visit n6. Now what neighbor does n6 have? We have goal only as the neighbor and n5 as the neighbor. n6 can visit. Okay, so from I have the path, let 47 plus 11 to goal as 58. So this is the distance, and from N6 who's next, the N5 is the next neighbor. So 47 plus 20 is much higher than 53, so we will just keep 53 and we will visit this, and after this we will mark goal as visit. So I don't care about who is the next, the goal is the next, and I am visit the goal and I am done here. So the length of the shortest path from the start to goal I can now guarantee is 58. So this is the shortest path. So total number of length that you will cover, the smallest length, that will be the 58th. So this is how Dijkster algorithm work, and the key idea basically is to visit the closest nodes first. Okay, so here we have key idea is to visit the closest node first, and as you start going away from the goal, you always visit the next node who is closest to you. Okay, so when you visit a node, when you do this step in the algorithm, you mark a node as visited, like all these, and the algorithm is guaranteed that point, the length of the shortest path you have found from the start to the node is the shortest. So there is no path that has the shorter length than this one. Okay, so I leave to you to prove that it is correct or not. It's an interesting proof to think about, but when you visit a node, you are guaranteed that at that point know the length of the shortest path from the start to the node. So in particular, that means that when you get to that goal, what you have is the shortest path. So the length of the shortest path from the start to the goal along of course the edges of the graph, and the running time of so the running time of how long does this algorithm take to run, this is what we have to look for. So it actually depends on the algorithm complexity, and it is very important topic in robotics or in computer science in general, how much running time or how much time it will take to compute this path. So it's not something that we have time to get into a lot more depth in this class. So some of you may have thought about that may have taken courses on this kind of programs which will calculate some, which will give you some time for making some calculations. Maybe you know those kind of programs, or even if you are running some code on C or some other programs, it will take some little bit time to give you the output. So how much time it will take, it depends on the running time of this algorithm. And but in general, what you say, it's not something that we have to worry about. Just very quickly, without going into any detail, the running time of this algorithm can be, if in very worst situation you have, will be the quadratic case, means it will be the quadratic time it will take the time, and it depends on the number of nodes. So if you have lot of nodes, then the running time of the algorithm will grow quite quadratically with the number of number of nodes that you have. And one addition question is, okay, now that you have the length of the shortest path, and from start to goal you know the shortest length is 58. Okay, what is the actual path that that this length 58 is? So to also compute the path and not just its length, you have to little bit be more bookkeeping. So for example, at this particular point here, anytime you update the g of n for the neighbor, you mark what's the node that you currently coming from. So you will mark arrow over here that you're coming from here, you're taking this shortest path. Similarly for n6 you are taking this, similarly for n7 you are taking this. So like this you will mark some arrows. Okay, so and because I wrote 58 here and I have visited n6 at that time, and then I could also mark that the parent goal is node n6. Similarly I wrote 47 here and my parent goal was n7, and so I can also take a note that the parent of node 6 is node 7 and parent of node 7 is node 3. So if you do that, in every time you do an update, you also mark who the parent of your node is. So in this way you will always remember what is the actual path, which is the shortest. So what's the node you're visiting at that particular point of time, it will give you the shortest path. Then if actually you want to find the path all the way when you are done, or you just have to follow the relationship from a node to its parent, and then eventually it will get you to all the way to the start along the shortest possible path. Okay, and that's again something that you can't formally prove. So it's an interesting exercise to think about, that you are going in reverse and finding the path again in the same way. And so when you will do it, you will offline. When you will do it offline, you will find out that if you are going in reverse also, you are getting the same answer. So this is all about the Dijkstra algorithm, and that's all for today. So in next class we are going to look for graph search on grids, and how we'll search for graphs on grids. So we have talked about one algorithm, and in next class we are going to look for graph search on grids, and then A star algorithm, and if time permits, then we will also move for differential robot drive, non-holonomic robots, and some future perspectives. So all these things we are going to cover in coming up few classes. Okay, so that's all. Please have a look of all these things again. For this lecture I am not giving any what you say assignment to you, and I am hoping that in probably 2 or 3 classes I am going to finish all the things remaining for our subject Introduction to Robotics, and we are going to wrap up our course very quickly. So still, if you have any doubt or something, you can ask for it. Maybe in next lecture I will give you some assignment, and after the last lecture I will give you some questions that you have to submit it in the form of assignment to me. And because we are not going to have now any project or something, so those assignment will cost you a good number of marks. So don't miss or don't skip to submit the assignment, because it will cost you a lot in terms of marks. So please be sincere and always submit the assignments on time. So that's all. Thank you very much, and see you in the next class.